All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. Today is May 4th, 2022. My name's Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, which just means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your teams while showing them the ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format's very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. We'll automatically post a video recording of today's session to the channel. So if you want to support it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Just go to youtube.com/cloudposse. So that said, let's kick it off. We've got a number of announcements here. First one is Cloud Posse specific. So if you've been following Cloud Posse for some time, we have a tool called Atmos. Atmos is a utility for hierarchical configurations, and it will run your Terraform under the hood for you. It works with many other tools as well as Helm file and Spacelift, among other things. And what we've done now with Atmos is added support for vendoring. So let me show you guys what that looks like here. So the gist of it is that any folder can now describe where it originated from or where it's from. It's kind of like Git subtrees, maybe, if you think about that. Only Git subtrees were a little bit restrictive in where you could pull sources from. It only supports Git. So what we did is we used the HashiCorp Go-Getter library to implement vendoring. You drop a configuration like this into a file called component.yaml into something like a Terraform root module directory. And you say where that root module comes from. So in this case, pulling from GitHub, Cloud Posse /Terraform AWS components, and downloading this Terraform root module here, pinned at a version. You could tell it what files you'd like excluded, what files you want included. You can even introduce the concept of mixin. So once that file is, once this repo is downloaded, you can inject other files that come from other locations. Go-Getter supports tons of different sources. I think it supports Docker images, Git, GitHub URLs, HTTP endpoints, the local file system, and I'm not sure off the top of my head everything else that it supports. So the problem this solves is Terraform doesn't have the ability to make root modules remote, just like almost every tool out there doesn't support that as well. So if you want to pull that into your CI and CD processes, you want to vendor in those root modules into your repo, this is how you would do it. You would use a tool like this. It was, we added, the implementation of this was heavily inspired by Vendir, which is by Tanzu, VMware Tanzu. So this is a general purpose vendoring solution that we originally were prescribing everyone use. Let's see if they have a nice page for documentation here. So in much the same way in their specification, that it inherits, we borrow from the Kubernetes configuration format of how config files define, and specify the path that you want to replicate to and where to get those sources from. So we just kind of borrowed on what Vendir is doing in Atmos. To make it yet a little bit more concrete, if we go over to this example here, this is a private repo, so you can't access it. But Cloud Posse, in Cloud Posse's infrastructure here, will have a lot of root modules. And these are necessarily vendored into the repository, so we can do things like GitOps and detect when files change. So what we can do now is we can put in one of those component files here, component.yaml, and reference a remote module that will get downloaded into this repo, and we can update that using things like renovate bot or possibly one day dependabot, things like that. Any questions on what we're doing with the vendoring support inside of Atmos, or why it's useful, or other questions?
Will this be the primary way that you folks that Atmos supports mixins? Like, is there any other way that it will get supported for, for example, if you weren't vendoring in a component, but you still wanted to have a mixin in that component?
Yeah. You don't have to use vendoring. You can just use mixins if you want. Yeah. That's a good question. So you don't have to specify this. You can just,
you can cut that. Okay.
Yeah. So then you could say,
cool.
Like, if you just want to always import the Cloud Posse context into your modules, this would be one way of doing that.
Sweet. I like it.
It will soon support templating inside of the files. Right now, it doesn't support that, but we do support templates in the URL that are parameterized, and then you can specify parameters here. So for example, this is the URI, references the version, and the version comes from here. All right. And what that means is we'll be, since we now have a workflow that allows us to do vendoring more easily, we're going to be upstreaming more regularly all of our components and make this as part of our development workflow, that most of our root modules are going to be sourced from upstreams. All right. Next is Terraform 1.2 release candidate just dropped. Now, HashiCorp is very quick at doing new releases, so I would expect within the next week or so, if there aren't any critical issues, that 1.2 will drop. Couple notable highlights is the ability to have pre and post conditions. This is nice as a way of doing validation inside of your Terraform modules, so that if you are using a data source and you expected to get a certain value and it doesn't match it, your post condition would be able to validate that. The other interesting one is the support of bearer tokens. So you can set specially crafted environment variables that begin with TF token and then the host name. And then when Terraform makes requests to that host name, it's going to pass the bearer token to that upstream as part of the request. Not a problem that we've run into, but I'd be curious if this solves any problems you've all been working with. And then lastly, a new feature for replace triggered by, which is a interesting way of forcing a recreation of a resource when something else changes. I'm curious if this would work with, for example, if you needed to rotate AWS IAM access keys, but I'm not 100% on that. Matt, I know I pinged you earlier. Were you able to take a look at this?
Yeah, I looked, and the only problem with this is it's like dependent on another resource, basically. Like, so we'd have to come up with something that like expired, like the other resource would have to expire to then force the IAM credentials to get like recreated. Like you can't say.
But that's where the null resource comes in, right? And you can cause a null resource to get triggered very easily on a date change, for example, right? And then
like I think I replied to you that it seems like it will work, but I also thought that there was another working way to do this. before this existed, and I couldn't ever get that to work. So until I actually play with it and try it, I'm not willing to say 100% yes, this will work.
So there you go. Matt says 100% it will work. No, I'm joking. So worth a shot, Matt. Gowie, you are the one looking into how to rotate IAM credentials. You can obviously use our Terraform resource for that, but this might enable it in pure Terraform.
Yeah, and I just posted a resource. So there is a time provider that's made by HashiCorp that a lot of people
tried
don't
using. Yeah, you can't use that and just the IAM resource. That's what we tried doing at first.
Yeah, same. And then I've gone the null resource route. But if you use time rotating with replace triggered by, that feels like it would be the combination that would actually do the trick.
Agreed. Yeah. I think that's why I say it should quote unquote work, but I haven't done it yet. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know you guys were referring to this resource.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I said that. I thought I said that before when I was talking through it. So we tried to do this. We actually thought we were going to be able to get it to work before this new lifecycle worked, and there was. That basically led to a failed experiment, which is why we wrote the auto expiring IAM credentials resource in our Terraform utils provider, AWS utils provider. So so hopefully this will negate the need for that resource, so we can do it in native Terraform, and we can retire that resource.
So an interesting observation here. Anything you guys want added to Terraform that isn't there today, you've been waiting on for a long time, add it to our utils provider, because every time HashiCorp sees it, hits our utils provider, they end up adding it, like VPC deletion, IAM rotation, and so forth. I'm just joking, actually, but it feels like they're targeting everything that we're finally fixing in our provider, they're finally fixing in the core.
Yeah, although the VPC deletion one is interesting, that it doesn't actually do the same thing that ours does. So what that does is you actually have to run a destroy for their resource to actually destroy the default VPC, whereas our resource on apply actually deletes the default resource. So it's a little, even though that's a little backwards, but we work differently.
That is actually more convenient.
I would prefer your I would say your approach is actually what you want.
Which is what most people want to. It's basically like you do default you have the default VPC as a resource, and then there's a flag on it that says force delete, and you say equals true, but that force delete only deletes on deletion, like when you run Terraform destroy. It doesn't actually do that, where ours, you just do that, and then the default VPC gets deleted.
It's funny because you would never run a destroy against a normal Terraform project, unless you were to have that as its own small root module, which not a lot of people do. Goofy.
Yeah, although it is useful to bring the default VPC under management if you want that resource in particular, to bring that VPC under management if you actually want to do something with the default VPC other than destroy it. Like if you actually want to then, attach all your security groups to it and change the routes and do all that from security best practices, now you can bring it under Terraform management without having to run an import. You just say AWS default VPC and it automatically becomes a managed resource. Without having to run Terraform import, which is cool, but the deletion part of it doesn't work very well unless you actually destroy.
All right, that's cool. The next announcement is Amazon's EKS web console has now added support for every resource type within the cluster. So you have a single pane of glass view into your Kubernetes cluster and what's deployed therein. I don't think we typically use the web console in this manner, but I can imagine for certain organizations that would be a nice thing. Maybe a sandbox EKS cluster, things like that.
Where are my CRDs?
Yeah. Let's see. They make no mention of CRDs here.
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah. So probably therefore it does not support CRDs.
Yeah, that was the first thing I looked at when I saw that. So
Yeah.
I was like, that'd be cool if they did.
Agreed.
If you're looking for that type of EKS or Kubernetes view tool, then Lens is the go-to. Like
Yeah, of course.
I don't see AWS adding much value when there's like really good open source type of tools out there.
Yeah. I guess the only thing that would be really useful for is like in quick and dirty type of environments where you haven't yet configured the credentials to connect to the cluster, and you can just do it natively through the console without having to worry about your kube context. That would actually be
That's a good point.
Be useful.
Yeah. The proof of concept cluster that's like you're going to destroy an hour later is totally fine to just click through there.
Yeah, or like, you know, from in our perspective, you know, customer X, Y, or Z says, I'm having this problem with the cluster and we want to hop on and take a quick look to see what the issue might be. Like, it would be nice to be able to just get click, click, click. Okay, here's all the things that are deployed, and I don't actually on my machine have to set up the context to, you know, connect to them. Even though that's fairly easy with geodesic and all the tools we have, it's still quicker if you can just hop into the console. But for anything really heavy, I agree with you. Lens is the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. So Lens, remember that it was, there was a company behind it. That company folded. They pushed the product into the open source, and it ultimately found a home with Mirantis, I believe, who acquired the project. It looks like they brought back a SaaS model for Lens here in some way. Has anybody looked at this?
You're required to log in now. I've never really found any benefit to it yet, so.
Oh, interesting.
I rarely use it. I prefer kube control myself, but it's all personal preference, I guess.
And it's interesting, like, it seems like a kind of random add-on here, but like, oh, and we can now manage dev clusters for you through Lens. So they have some way of doing that.
Is that like a cluster of just the Lens application? Yeah. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
no, I think it's a dev cluster that you can use for kicking the tires on things, I guess.
Yeah, it's like instead of running Minikube on your laptop, you could spin up a cluster here and experiment with it and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
That seems so weird for them to do.
Minikube.
Yeah.
This is like Mirantis's third iteration, I think, of trying to reclaim something. They were the original OpenStack guys, if you remember.
Yeah, they were. So I don't know. This feels like a total stretch to me, but
Whatever to do to make $1, I guess.
yeah. And lastly, a tool I know nothing about. It was posted in the Office Hours channel and looks really cool. But yeah, anybody know anything about Werf? And it seems like another Flux / Argo CD alternative.
I think it's just a CLI tool though, right? I think it's supposed to run all on the command line.
Oh, interesting. So then you would use this together with like GitHub Actions or Circle or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's like what the heck's that the thing with all the container based CI?
Earthly.
Yeah, Earthly. Yeah, I think it's like more an Earthly competitor than it is like anything else.
Hmm. Oh, this is a weird site. I'm like, there's no content here. And I start scrolling, and then the page starts updating as I scroll.
How much market space is there for CI/CD tools? I mean, I'm just wondering where the limit is here.
Did you cover Dagger already?
Dagger has come up at some point, not recently. Is it dagger.io or something or? Oh, Dagger's,
I believe so.
Dagger's, is that the new project from the original Docker founder?
Yeah.
ROS.
Yeah, exactly. This, yeah, we did cover this briefly. We haven't, not more than just the press release though. Do you have anything to add to it?
No, not yet. It just it seems like the next most suitable way to build like a complex set of, you know, dependent, inherited, similar, and you know, versions of Docker containers, like a set of base containers. So far, I've used Docker Make, which is a Python project, which is kind of cool. Allows you to define stuff.
Yeah, to answer Andy's question, not that long ago, I read an article. I don't remember if it was Gartner or Forrester, but one of the big research firms that said they thought that the total addressable market for the continuous integration and delivery space was going to reach like 4.5 billion by 2023. So it's pretty big market from in terms of dollars out there. So you know, who knows what, you know, how all these people will solve it and how it will consolidate and etc. But
I'd be curious if that had a analysis on which tools had the most market share, like by order.
yeah, I mean, of course, somewhere. That's how they get paid to do all that kind of stuff. But it's there's probably a Gartner Magic Quadrant for CICD or something like that. So
I think Microsoft's buy of GitHub is a prime example of where it's going, right? I think everybody's kind of migrating towards the new, those tools that were way more feature rich.
yeah, for at least in the enterprise space. But like, you know, as an example, Jenkins also has a giant slice of the enterprise market still, you know, from legacy implementations, et cetera. And even Microsoft, like you have GitHub Actions and everything you can do in GitHub Actions, but then they also have like Azure DevOps, which seems to be a competing product to their own product. So it'll be interesting as it all consolidates.
I think Azure DevOps is going to be sunset or morph into GitHub Actions. I don't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's eventually going to get there, but it hasn't gotten there yet. So, oh yeah, there you go. That one said that persistence market research says it's going to be 19 billion by 2031. So,
yeah.
So,
so someone get out there and get right in your CI/CD tool to get it, claim that share.
Yeah. Because all we need is another platform.
Right. All I need is 0.1% of that market to be really rich.
But then there's also the flip side of that, where you're talking about a gold rush, and the people who made money off the gold rush were selling shovels and Levi's jeans to the people who were panning for gold, you know? So, I mean, there's a space for other tools that, you know, bundle these applications together, or like improve the processes for CI/CD before you even get to CI/CD. So, I mean, there's like this meta market around CI/CD that people might not even look at, but
yeah,
I think that's a larger space, not a larger space, but like I said, this alternate space for benefit as well when it comes to CI/CD.
That's an interesting observation. I like it. At first, I thought you were going to say build tools that you can sell to CI/CD companies.
Well, I mean, and that could be part of it too, you know?
Yeah.
One question while we're on this topic, sorry if I'm interrupting you, Eric, but has anybody used any of the Kubernetes CI/CD tools like Tektron? Like, does anybody see the market going in that direction?
You mean like the Tecton pipelines or something?
Tecton, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
In Tecton, I see Argo workflows kind of growing, but the people who are using it are not really, what do you call it? You know, exposing it too much. You know, they do their business, but they don't talk about it so much. So it seems to be used a lot.
So Tecton might be an example of what Michael Jenkins was talking about. Build tools that other CI/CD platforms will use. So Jenkins X uses Tecton under the hood.
That I did not know. That's interesting.
I'd be interested to know how many people on this call are actually managing Kubernetes right now.
I am. Like 8 clusters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a few clusters.
I had a client that had 16.
Nice.
And managing, for Cloud Posse, I mean, it's a bread and butter, and managing for us though means EKS. We're not doing any of the classic COPS management anymore, or build your own Kubernetes clusters.
I take it back. We have 16 as well. No, I haven't had to manage the control plane in like 2 years, but I did a lot of that in my last job.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're managing the control plane nowadays, I feel like that's you got to be doing something niche.
Yeah.
To be in that game, unless you're making a mistake.
All right. Well, that was the end of my announcements. Did anyone else have any other announcements before we get into Q&A? All right. So one of the questions from Nija was, does anyone have some easy to follow instructions for minimizing the cost of your NAT gateways in EC2? And he says, I've seen suggestions about using a Lambda to terminate the NAT gateway once the deployment of the server is complete, switching to another gateway, other gateway types like internet gateways or VPC endpoints. But these are quite overwhelming me because I'm not always, but I'm not an AWS guru. So the TLDR is, if you use one of the mature subnet modules out there, or VPC modules out there, Cloud Posse has them. There are other ones you'll find. There's a feature flag. And if you're not doing anything that requires the scale and uptime and availability of a Amazon managed NAT gateway, just use NAT instances. And if you're not pushing much traffic, you can even launch these on T1 micros, and your costs are negligible. Now, it's not going to scale, it's not going to give you gigabit throughput, but you might not need that for your project. So I think the easiest way is, if you're using like Cloud Posse's modules, which I'm familiar with. Let's see here, there's a dynamic subnets, I think. NAT gateway variables. And we're looking at so if you just enable this feature flag for NAT instances and specify the NAT instance type, we even default to a very small NAT T3 micro, your costs are negligible. The next thing you can do is operate in fewer availability zones. Just like if you're just working in a development environment, just launch in one AZ, have one subnet with one NAT instance, and that's going to be your most economical configuration.
You can also, if the reason you're using NAT gateways is to talk to Amazon services, you can also launch VPC endpoints so that you don't need them anymore. Like if you don't actually.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you for your suggestions. Eric, sorry, I was trying to note down what you were saying, and I think I missed the second one you said. The first one you said was NAT instances. What was the second?
Oh, well, okay. So technically, all you ever need is one NAT gateway or NAT instance if you want all of your subnets to be able to egress, to be able to access the internet. Okay. However, it is my strong opinion that you should have a minimum of one NAT instance or NAT gateway per availability zone that you operate in to maintain HA. Because the whole purpose of having multiple availability zones is for HA. What good is it to only have one NAT gateway or one NAT instance if you operate in more than one availability zone? So your question just brought up this conversation. There's a proposal, somebody opened up a pull request for introducing an option for a single NAT gateway in our dynamic subnet module. We haven't merged it. And usually I'm like all for like, fine, okay, we want to accept as many pull requests as possible. But this is one I really don't like, because I think it sends the wrong message. Just because you can have one NAT gateway or NAT instance doesn't mean you should, and you're sending the wrong message to the company. Oh, look at this, we're operating multiple availability zones, we're highly available. No, you're not, if you don't have multiple AZs. So we don't have that there to prevent that configuration. We did agree that if we did want to implement this, that we can support a max NAT gateways feature. So maybe you can have 3 or 4 NAT gateways deployed, if, for example, if you're operating in 5 AZs. But that is something I don't believe they have implemented yet.
Okay, thanks a lot for the I guess the responses. One thing that I'm thinking about now is, I don't know if I said it in the question, but the NAT gateways, I'm actually not sure what is like deploying them, because essentially what happened was I was trying to deploy an Amazon Neptune cluster, and AWS documentation has some samples, some sample like CloudFormation templates that you can use. So I used one of those, and it ended up deploying, or rather, I ended up seeing an expensive NAT gateway in my bill. And when I went back to the templates, I couldn't even find what it was that deployed the NAT gateway. So I did there's some documentation about how to like track down the cause of the expense, like what servers it's talking to and all of that. But the only thing it gives me is just IP addresses, and like there are more than 200 IP addresses. So I just don't know, you know, where it's coming from and what all of that traffic is about. So it's almost like I get what you're saying, but from my point of view, it's I don't know
what to do.
It's like I don't know the root of the problem.
Well, the root of the problem is using off-the-shelf CloudFormation template that you don't have the ability to manage and modify. And you wouldn't be the first person that complains about NAT gateways and bringing up your bills. Like if you're using CloudFormation, sorry, not Cloud. If you're using Control Tower, I believe it provisions your VPCs and your NAT gateways for you. And if you're operating in a lot of accounts, you might be spending thousands of dollars a month on NAT gateways doing almost nothing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Are you using Control Tower?
No, I'm not. I just plugged the templates and just deployed it in the CloudFormation console.
But the organization you're in, do you manage this AWS organization, or is that managed by like the company you are at?
No, it's managed by the company. Like I'm not the person who does most of the AWS things.
So I mean, your NAT gateways could have just been deployed by the baseline that's deployed from Control Tower, or however your company is managing the VPCs, for example.
Oh, interesting. So for sure, I probably need to look into Control Tower.
Well, so but are you certain that the CloudFormation template you deployed provisioned a net new VPC with new subnets and new NAT gateways, or not necessarily?
Yes, I am certain of that.
Oh, you are
just from yes.
Okay. Yeah. So then ignore what I said about Control. Then the last suggestion I have for you is don't use private subnets. If you just use public subnets, you don't even need NAT gateways. And if this is just like a pilot or just a prototype, you can do that. It's not a best practice, but if you're just doing something for experimentation and learning, public subnets won't need NAT gateways, and therefore you're not paying for it.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Okay.
And public subnets will expose everything to the public internet, so that's why, you know.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm just thinking. So, I mean, I guess I'll have to do some research into this, but is it possible to specify that it should be NAT instances instead of gateways inside of the CloudFormation template?
It would have to be, well, like you're using something that's off the shelf, right? So they would have had to code it, so to say, for NAT instances. It's not an Amazon feature flag. It's something that you implement in 2 different architectures.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Could you please link to the the Terraform, one of the first resources that you showed had the option to do
Yeah, but I
had to
mean,
do with the dynamic subnet, I think.
yeah, I can definitely share that with you, but this is where you're going down the rabbit hole. Because, starting up Terraform, if you're not already using Terraform is, I mean, now you need to start managing, how are you going to manage your Terraform state backends, and how are you going to start doing Terraform in general? I wouldn't just do Terraform just to get this one thing done. You can just as well do ClickOps and things like that.
Okay.
I shared the link in the Office Hours channel.
Thank you.
So next question is from Venkata. How many of you, now this is, how many of you do not commit the Terraform lock file to source control? Or let's just say, how many of you are actually committing your Terraform lock file to source control? The docs, I don't think the docs really push people one way or another on committing that file, and why you should use it over required version. So I think the easiest way to understand why you should have the Terraform lock file, or why you have the option of committing it, is for the same reason that there are lock files in all other mainstream languages from Node and Go, etc. The idea is that it's very hard to manage the required version in your provider definition, and making sure that, if you're using modules and those modules use modules that use other providers, you might not know every provider or keep every provider up to date in your provider definitions. So the Terraform lock file generates it programmatically, automatically every time. So you have a precise version pinning of the last known working configuration. So I think it's a more strict way for you to manage locking in a automated fashion. Plus, then there's all the Terraform commands built into the tool to help update those.
I have a good use case for lock files. I apply the same code to multiple environments, 8 or 10 of them. So we start out in dev and generate the lock file there and distribute that through the other environments. So we have a deterministic run. It's also interesting, and I think like long ago we might have touched on this, but in terms of versioning, basically we've come to this is a little, tangent, but keeping the submodules pretty wide open, sometimes just like equals greater than some known version. And then in our root modules, that's where we're pretty much defining what those versions are that get locked into the lock files.
Are you committing those lock files, did you say?
We are definitely committing them. Okay. It starts in dev and I just copy it over to the other environments, for lack of a better alternative now, but we're using the same one. And the one last point I wanted to make was that what we ran into was a little edge with Spacelift being a little behind the latest Terraform release.
Yeah.
So we can't do like, tilde greater than 117 because all of a sudden, it's trying to run 119. So we have to pin those discreetly as well. So all of those things lead to doing that, plus running Terraform providers lock, because most of us are working on Macs and the Terraform stuff is running on their Unix public nodes.
So this is I was going to say this part. So when you have the lock file, be advised that those are the SHAs for your architecture, and in CI, it might be running under a different architecture. So didn't they add a command though to pin it across all architectures? And I don't recall 100%, but I felt like there was a change on that.
The last time I played with it, there was still something that wasn't working right. And if you generated the lock file on Darwin, then it was having problems on Linux based architectures still. But maybe that's been fixed in one of the more recent updates.
The Terraform providers lock just adds the SHAs for whatever other environments too. So it kind
Oh,
of
it does now? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, the Terraform's cloud provider has the lock file like on the cloud if you run it off of Terraform Cloud. I think you guys run into these issues because you're doing them on S3 buckets and whatnot, but the cloud provider does it all on their end.
Oh, really? The lock files are stored on the Terraform Cloud backend?
If you have it set up to use the remote backend like that, yeah. I mean, if you're doing local, then
Yeah.
then they get stored locally, but you can set up to be remote and do it like that.
Gotta think about that.
But yeah, in
That
my
breaks
case, I am
initial
using,
model for how it works, because to me, that's a file that shouldn't belong in the remote state, but a file that
Yeah.
should belong in your version control.
So it's
I
not
was even trying to
necessarily
figure out.
it's not necessarily in the remote state, I don't think, because they also house your modules and everything for you, and you can run it all off of their, I guess, their platform. I guess it's a single place to have everything run. Like everything runs off of their cloud platform.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
All right.
Kind of got an idea about potentially relying on mix-ins to manage sort of a prescribed set of version locks, because it gets spread out so much. There's so much copy paste, you might say, if you have many stacks.
Yeah. Are you using mix-ins today already, or you're just thinking about it?
No, I'm not. I'm using Vendor extensively for certain
Oh, you
things,
are?
Helm chart
Okay, cool.
rendering and stuff, but I'm not using mix-ins at all in Terraform. I'm using a lot of symlinks
Yeah.
for like shared variable files, so symlink in a global shared file.
Conceptually, I would say that's almost the same as a mix-in. It's just your implementation is with symlinks versus copying.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I might look at that.
So yeah, you would be able to get away with that in Vendor.
I've done that before with like the mix-ins thought process with version files to keep like, 2.5 dozen root modules all using the same provider versions, so that a developer doesn't need to install 50 different provider versions.
Did that work out?
And yeah, I thought it worked out. I mean, it was a make file process. Like, I mean, I basically had one versions.tf file that I would copy via, a make target to all of them. And then I had a lock file that went along with it. And that worked. It wasn't the best. I think that, there's better ways to do it, but the mix-ins approach you guys added via Atmos, I like.
Cool. Yeah.
That was my previous actually too, was a make file with using J2 and variables and putting it out there that way with the make file.
Yeah.
I would like to be able to mix in certain, bodies of work, if you know what I mean. So let's say I have a module instantiation of something. I would like to be able to have a chunk, sort of like JSONet inheritance works, where I could override things in certain stacks. Otherwise, I would have to sort of
the overrides file in Terraform.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
So you could use Vendor or Atmos, but and then your overrides files. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it mixes into the into the module block.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, I'm told that. I'm so deep into JSONet for all the other stuff. So
that's
interesting.
interesting.
That one.
We haven't really absorbed JSONet yet, but it comes up at least a couple times a month.
Grafanatonka and Grizzly is amazing.
I wanted to move on to the next question here. Mohammed, are you on the line? I think he might have had to drop. That's too bad. This was a question from me to Mohammed. He had posted this message on crossplane, and that there's a tool now to generate crossplane providers for any Terraform provider. And it just highlights just how little I know about crossplane and how it works. And that just intrigued me that it has a model similar to providers in Terraform, that a utility like this would be needed. So yeah, anyone else take a stab at it? Matt, maybe? Or
I know about their provider mechanism. I mean, it's very similar to Terraform in that you install the root crossplane operator into the cluster, but that operator doesn't know how to translate a RDS YAML into a request to AWS, right? Or to know how to deal with AWS credentials and all the fun stuff they're in. So they need a provider, and they're actually called crossplane dash provider dash name of the provider. So there's a crossplane provider AWS, there's a crossplane provider GCP. You have a manifest file when you create a crossplane cluster that you can, you know, install various versions of providers, very similar to a versions.tf in Terraform. And this TerraJet project is the way they're doing it now is they're using this code to basically look at Terraform providers and then construct the corresponding crossplane provider from that Terraform provider. So they're like mapping Golang code to Golang code is what I understand. But they're doing it like what they need. They take the Terraform provider code that, you know, translates a resource block into, you know, create, read, update, destroy, and it maps it into the create, read, update, destroy that Crossplane knows how to work with. So, yeah, very similar concept.
In your mind, would Crossplane go somewhere here in our 4 layers of infrastructure? If we were deploying Crossplane, that would go. That would be, you know, that depends on clusters existing, right? So it would be after we provision clusters and WAF and things like that, then we'd be deploying Crossplane here, maybe.
It's interesting because originally when I came across Crossplane, I thought, oh, all the chicken and egg problems, because like, hey, do you create one cluster that's then spawns all your other clusters? Or do you create the VPC and the cluster and then you install Crossplane and it creates your service accounts and your WAF and your everything above? I think it depends on how you want to do it. I don't have enough experience with it myself yet to actually give a great opinion. My thought process right now is that Terraform still has a good place to be the owner of the network and the cluster, and then everything above the cluster. And maybe that's, you know, that's like a fungible line, but everything above the cluster, Crossplane is the manager.
Yeah, what
that doesn't mean you would need to do Datadog management or that type of stuff with Crossplane, but I'm just saying environment, platform specific infra. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, that's okay. I was just gonna say I just quickly took a look at peek at the code to see what they're doing, and basically they're using Go reflection to introspect the Terraform provider code, and then they're creating Kubernetes CRDs for each of the resources that are contained within there, so that you can then just use a Kubernetes manifest to compose any CRD you want, and then it actually uses the Terraform provider to provision those things under the hood.
Sweet.
That sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, I can't say how well this works. I could just say what the code says it's doing. Yeah. Pretty interesting.
Talk about abstractions on abstractions.
I mean, that's kind of like how Pulumi launched, right? Pulumi was basically you know,
exactly.
Yeah.
They did a higher order language that then used the Terraform provider under the hood to provision the infrastructure that after they built their own DAG.
It's turtles all the way down.
It'd be helpful at this point. I wish someone had a nice Medium post on the differences between now, like help me mentally, you know, picture Terraform and where it overlaps with like Pulumi and Crossplane and you know, CDK and so forth.
Yeah, I was about to say, and this isn't all that different from what CDK for Terraform's doing either, right? You basically can write all your constructs in CDK, and then under the hood, it reduces down to Terraform resources that get applied with the provider. So It's
CDKTF though, it's ultimately just being reduced to raw Terraform code, right? Which is
Yeah.
then applied. But in crossplane,
But it's
it sounds like it's doing it at the Go language layer.
I mean, it still has to create. It still has to create a declarative DAG that it can pass to. That it can pass the Terraform to say,
Okay.
like, make this so, and then Terraform actually takes that tag and then, you know, and then figures out how to apply it in its own method. So I don't think they're actually doing it in TF. They're just calling the Go methods like to actually build the DAG programmatically, and then they're passing it to the Terraform engine under the hood to say apply this.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
The benefit there being that they're doing it at a probably per resource level. Like you don't need to think about the root module breakdowns because they're storing all their state in etcd, and therefore root module boundaries don't really matter that much, or they're not a thing.
Yeah, they're basically like every, I think the way, from what I can see, again, not having used it, it looks like every instance that you declare basically becomes kind of like its own module, like if you look at it that way. So like if I say I want, you know, a VPC, like the VPC itself just gets created, and then if I say something else, it just, you know, I want a subnet within that VPC, it treats that subnet as like its own CRD, and then, but you can reference properties from the other, you know, from the other definitions basically to then pass into that, which is kind of interesting. They're just helping with the composition basically at a higher level than you can do with Terraform directly, you know.
Yeah, and I don't know if they're creating an explicit DAG like internally, even regardless of the TerraJet usage, but they do, because they do that. Because they do that, like I'm gonna blank. They do that connection of attributes. It'll block on creating that one resource, even though it's not necessarily in a DAG. It'll block on creating a subnet that depends on a VPC because it's waiting for that VPC to actually get synced and be in, you know, a ready state to pass that attribute down to the subnet so it can actually create it.
So we are almost out of time. Are there any last questions we can get to? I was just scanning through the Zoom chat and the office hours channel, and I didn't see any more questions. Any last minute questions? All right. Well, then maybe we leave it right on time here, a little bit earlier this week. If there's no other questions. Sorry, they just started mulching some trees outside of my office here. I'm not sure if you pick up that background noise.
Can't hear it at all.
Nope.
Nope. Oh, okay. Well, that's a relief. All right. Well, if no other questions, then let's wrap it up. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, head over to youtube.com/cloudposse and subscribe. It does help us out a great deal. Connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Osterman, or register for our weekly office hour sessions by just going to cloudposse.com/office-hours. If you're interested in working with Cloud Posse, the best way to get started is just to fill out some information about yourself. Go to cloudposse.com/quiz, and we'll present an option for you to book a meeting with us and go through your situation to see if we can help you out. With that said, thanks everyone for your time this week. We'll talk to you next week. Same place, same time.
Thank you.
Thank you.